So I'm going to share a few words with you, and then I'm going to give you an image that helps kind of explain what I mean by those words. So here are the words. Perseverance is hitched to hope. Perseverance is hitched to hope. Now here's the accompanying image. So imagine there's a wagon or a trailer full of heavy stones just sitting there, not going anywhere. Heavy stones. Now, how is that wagon full of heavy stones going to move forward? Well, you need to hitch it to something that has power. So you're going to find a half-ton truck or something, and you're going to hitch it to that truck. And then because that truck is powerful, it's going to drive those heavy stones forward. Okay. Now, the reason I say this is because I feel this is a time when a lot of us feel like we are carrying heavy burdens, aren't we? We have these heavy burdens, and we want to move forward. We want to persevere. And so if we're going to do that, we need to be hitched ourselves to something that has more power, to something that is greater, that's something that is able to move us forward. And that something is hope. It's the hope of Christ and who he is. So that's what I mean when I say perseverance. If we want to persevere, it needs to be hitched to something. Perseverance, it's hitched to hope. Do you want to persevere? Do you want to move forward with the struggles and the heavy burdens that you are carrying? Well, that's what we're going to look at today as we engage in part 8 in the Down to Earth series. Okay, we're going to unpack that question a little bit and find some practical ways that we can do that in our own lives. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a video because I haven't showed it in about a month and a half, but it gets us all on the same page about what this series is all about and some background as to the author, James. Let's take a look together. This teaching series is called Down to Earth. It's a line-by-line look at the book of James in the Bible. Why is it called Down to Earth? Because it presents godly wisdom that is understandable, practical, and usable on a day-to-day basis. These are unsettling days. Many people, maybe even you, feel disoriented or uncertain. So this is steady wisdom, clear wisdom for the here and now, as we seek to be more like Jesus and be his hands and feet no matter what. This letter is written by James, the half-brother of Jesus. He was a well-respected and dependable leader in the early church in the years after the resurrection, especially in Jerusalem. He earned the nickname Camel Knees because he apparently spent so much time on his knees in prayer that they became hard and calloused like a camel. Let me tell you, that's the kind of person you want to get wisdom from. James was martyred in 62, so the letter was obviously written before that. His letter was written to a wide audience and is sometimes called the Proverbs of the New Testament because of its understandable and succinct wisdom. An important theme is connecting your faith with your actions, with how you live on a daily basis. Down to Earth, a teaching series about the book of James. All right, so that gets us all on the same page. And as we open our Bibles to James chapter 5, we need to keep in mind that phrase as it marinates in our minds, right? Perseverance is hitched to hope. Okay, so open your Bibles. I'm reading from the New International Version. Remember, we always go to the Scriptures because the Bible is the primary place where we learn about God's will. The primary place. It's not down the list, it's the primary place. So also, if you've got the Westminster Church app, you can go into sermon notes. You can follow in the fields to help you engage more deeply in the text. If you've got your Bible, got a pen or pencil, make some notes. There's nothing wrong with that. It's great because we're recording insights that we have. And as we start in chapter 5, this is the final chapter, keep in mind that we've just come out of chapter 4, and chapter 4 has just warned us about the pitfalls of pride and of arrogance, okay? Beginning at verse 1. Now listen, you rich people. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. The corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Pause. Okay, so clearly he's talking to rich people. And, you know, wealth in and of itself isn't bad. You can do a lot of good things with wealth. However, they're obviously not using it properly. They're obviously loving this wealth more than other things. And as he always does, the words of James, the author here, this authoritative leader in the early church, reflects those of his half-brother Jesus. And if some of those phrases here make sense, it's because they echo what Jesus himself says in the Sermon on the Mount. Right? Don't store up for yourself treasures on earth where moths and vermin, etc. Instead, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Right? These are the eternal things. These are the things that really matter. Another thing I'll highlight here from these opening verses at the end of verse 3 is he talks about you've hoarded wealth in the last days. It's like these are the last days and you're hoarding up wealth, stuff that isn't going to last anyway. Now, what are the last days? So in the language of the New Testament, the last days, this is this current period of human history. And it's the last period of human history before Jesus returns, before Judgment Day. Okay? That's what the last days are. So there's nothing else after this other than the return of Jesus. So these are the last days. And let me tell you, I don't know if you're all experiencing this too, but several people have talked to me and said, things seem to be getting worse and worse out there, crazy. Like, see all this stuff happening? Are we living towards the end of the last days? All right, so we are in this period of human history. Verse 4, look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. Pause. Okay, so a couple of things here. We learn a bit more about these people. First of all, they're being unfair. They're being unjust. Okay, so they have failed to pay the workers. Now, remember, this is an agrarian society. A lot of people are living hand to mouth. There's no direct deposit. Not only are they doing this and hurting these people's livelihood, but it's a contravention of the Old Testament laws from the books of Moses, right? So that's what we learn about them. Later on, verse 5, you have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. What is that? It might be an allusion or reference to Judgment Day, right? Judgment Day, which, for God's people is a glorious day of Christ's return, of ushering in the new heavens and the new earth, hope and peace reigning. But for the godless, it's going to be a very bad day, a day of judgment, right? And then he talks about in verse 6, you have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. Who is that? Maybe it's the innocent people who've been holding back their wages. Maybe it's someone else for some innocence. Quite possibly it's a reference to Jesus, who is the innocent one or the righteous one. The text leaves it a bit ambiguous. And then verse 7, a shift happens. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. So maybe these are the people who have suffered under the hand of those greedy, unjust, wealthy people. But it could also be like a more widely extended to people suffering in general among his readership. We know he had a very broad readership, James, in the first century, right? Be patient, therefore, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. One of the things I'm going to explain a bit later, this is an imperative verb in the Greek. He's commanding them, hey, be patient. And the reason they can be patient is because the Lord is coming. Jesus is coming back. The difficulties, the hardships that you're experiencing are temporary. But patience is a very important and powerful theme in this. So I'm going to put up a definition of patience. I looked through a few different resources. One of my Greek New Testament dictionaries, Louv-Nita, they define it like this. They're very helpful here. A state of emotional calm in the face of provocation, being provoked, or misfortune, and without complaint or irritation. That's really good. A state of emotional calm in the face of, so even though you're dealing with being provoked or misfortune, and without complaint or irritation, friends, that is a great way to understand patience. The suffering won't last. Christ will return. Evil will be judged, good will be rewarded, all things will be made right. The Mennonites have this saying, given that we're living in the last days, they say, we are living in the time of the Lord's patience. Because some people say, when's Jesus going to return and fix this whole messed up world? Like, come on. And God is not slow in keeping his promise, as the New Testament says, but he is patient. He wants people to return, to repent, to come to know him. We are living in the time of the Lord's patience, the Mennonites say. I think that's a helpful word. Continuing, see how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop. Patiently, there's that word again, waiting for the autumn and spring rains, which were even more important in ancient Israel because it was so dry. Verse 8, you too, be patient. There's a second time an imperative verb comes up. Be patient and stand firm. Another imperative, stand firm, also translated as establish yourselves. Take courage, establish your hearts, right? Stand firm because the Lord's coming is near. Again, a reference to the Lord's coming is near. Verse 9, don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Okay, so there's the thing, we know, when we're going through something tough, it's easy to grumble. That's the easy thing to do, right? Grumble. And clearly here they're grumbling against one another. So I think that's not going to help you. And then again, he references the return of Jesus. You have to be living in integrity. Lord, we're all going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And so the judge here in the text, that's a reference to Jesus yet again. Verse 10, notice how the return of Jesus is so shaping how their behavior should be in the here and now. Verse 10, brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Pause. Okay. This is a significant chunk of text as well. The prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. He's saying, look to the prophets, the people who speak in God's name, who speak and who have persevered. The example of their lives can be inspiring to us and can help us. So we can think of, Moses. We can think of, Jeremiah, Elisha, Elijah, Micaiah, John the Baptist. Like the list goes on, right? And then we count as blessed those who have persevered. So what does it mean to be blessed? To be blessed means you have received God's favor. You have been a recipient of God's generosity. That's really what the New Testament usually means by blessed. So it's obviously a good thing. And people kind of we have even though people might not define it that way, we still carry that around. Even people who don't believe in God necessarily, but at Thanksgiving or Christmas, something, and they'll post something on Instagram #blessed. It's like some sort of awareness, but some sort of power greater than I is somehow done something for me, and I'm thankful for the gifts I've been given, right? So this still comes, but here specifically, of course, it's from the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Blessed are those who have persevered. And then he raises Job. And by the way, the King James Version translation of this passage says the patience of Job. So that's why, the expression, someone had the patience of Job. It comes from this verse in the King James Version and the story in the book. But it references Job. So Job, in the Old Testament book that bears his name, right in the first chapter, says he is blameless and upright. So here's this guy who's faithful to God, and he has all this horrific stuff happen to him. He loses his children, his wealth, he loses his health. And the whole book is talking about all this, talking about this and struggling with this and why might this be happening. It's one of the powerful books about suffering and dealing with this in the real world, even amongst the faithful. But Job, he struggles, he questions, but in the end, he proves faithful. He is trusting in God's almightiness. Who are we to question God, right? The closing chapters of Job are very, very powerful. And you have seen what the Lord finally brought about. And so Job, in his situation, sees many of his fortunes restored. And what happens to us in this life, and this is like a part of our human condition, is we have this one chapter of our life that's really difficult. And we have a real hard time saying, you know what? The Lord is compassionate and merciful because I'm not feeling it right now. But one of the things the story of Job encourages us to do is to widen the lens a little bit, look at a bigger picture. And when you see other chapters of your life, and from the perspective of eternity, you see that God is compassionate and merciful. There's no one amongst God's people one day looking back from the scope of eternity who isn't going to be able to say, God is compassionate and merciful. Okay, and so there's that phrase, compassionate and merciful. If that sounds familiar, it's because it comes up a lot. It's like a little creed that's embedded in the biblical text. It comes up in Exodus. It comes up a couple times in the Psalms. It comes up in Jonah. Like it comes up time and time again. God is compassionate and merciful. Verse 12. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or anything else. He's not talking about cursing here, although you shouldn't do that. He's really talking about like taking oaths, like swearing to something in heaven on earth, by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no, otherwise you will be condemned. And so it's kind of like a strange little addition on. It's hard to know how this connects to the text, but I think it's because you get the sense that because these people are struggling and they're grumbling against one another, people are taking false oaths and not keeping up to their word and their commitments and everything else. And this is somehow sullying the conversation and the relationships that they're having with one another. So it's really enjoining us to be truthful and sincere in our speech. So we're going to end the text there at verse 12. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, so having looked at that text, it's very telling that James, and I alluded to this, James uses a series of imperative verbs. Now, this is one of those situations where in the original documents, in the Greek text, in the originals, and when it gets translated into English, sometimes you miss something of the force of something, and it doesn't always pick up or translate necessarily in the English. So I'd like to highlight something that's going on. So in the original Greek, a series of imperative verbs are being used. And the reason that's significant is because this is the strongest way in the Greek language to command someone to do something. It's the strongest way to command someone to do something. Not only that, but the speaker or the writer is assuming a position of authority and expects the hearers or readers to do what they say. And so we're going to put some examples of the imperative verbs up here that he uses. Be patient, he says. That's one of them. First of all, verse 8, be patient. That's an imperative verb, because the Lord's coming is near. So the first and the second are also because the Lord's coming is near. In verse 8, also he says, stand firm, which is establish your hearts. Okay, so stand firm, establish your hearts. Why? Because the Lord's coming is near. Verse 9 says, don't grumble, which is an imperative, or you too will be judged. Again, that's a reference to the Lord's return. In verse 10, he says, take or look to the prophets, imperative verb, as examples of perseverance. So if you look at all these commands, be patient, stand firm, don't grumble, take the prophets as examples, what you'll notice is that there's a consistency. The reason they are to have this behavior, that he's commanding them to have this behavior, is because Jesus is returning. We can be people of hope. Fundamentally, perseverance is hitched to hope because of Jesus' returns, and that somehow blankets over and covers all and changes the experience of what they're going through, even though it is very, very difficult, okay? Christ will return. We may be a bit foggy on some of the details, but he will return. He will punish evil. He will reward faithfulness. He will wipe every tear from every eye. And we will just experience such an incredible, profound peace that any peace that we have experienced in this little life here on earth, as temporary as it might be, in comparison, it will seem like a little sparkler compared to a massive fireworks display on Parliament Hill on July 1st. Like, it's going to be so incredible and so amazing. Then in verse 10, he offers one final imperative to look to the prophets as examples of perseverance. Okay, so what about us? We want to persevere through our hardships and through our struggles. Well, I think that what James says to his people struggling then is also helpful for us struggling today. And the first is be patient. Be patient. Simple as that. Remember the definition of patience: a state of emotional calm in the face of provocation or misfortune and without complaint or irritation. That's great. Pastor Tim Keller, former preacher at Redeemer Church in New York Times best-selling author. He's the founder of the Gospel Coalition. He defines biblical patience like this: an ability to face trouble without blowing up. An ability to face trouble without blowing up. I love that. And we've all blown up, haven't we? Maybe Jen hasn't, but I have. You have this week. Okay, she has as well. It happens to us, right? Sometimes we feel we can't help it. It's like something happens, and it's like we're this pop bottle that's been shaken up, or a champagne bottle on New Year's Eve, and we just blow it. And after we're like, well, that wasn't patience. So we want to be patient. We know it's hard sometimes, which leads us to our second point about a reason to compel us to be patient. Number 2. Be patient because suffering won't last. Christ is coming. Friends, life is full of suffering and hardship, but it will not always be this way. Jesus will return and make everything right. And so when you look at the verses between 7 and 9, as the people are encouraged to be patient again, stand firm, look to the example of the prophets, the return of Jesus is brought up multiple times. The principle is, when you have something good to look forward to, it softens the blow of what you're currently going through. We know this is true. When you have something good to look forward to, it softens the blow of what you're currently going through. And let's take this down to a very practical daily level for us. You're having a crummy week. Someone at school or work said something, and that wasn't fair. I'm just not feeling great. Something's happened, whatever. But in a week and a half, you've got a great experience with your friends. You're going to have a get-together, and you always have fun with these trusted friends. Oh, you just love getting together. You're going to have such a great time. Well, because you have something good to look forward to, it softens the blow of your current crummy week, right? When you have something good to look forward to. All right, so we also need to keep that in mind. Let's raise it up a bit. COVID-19 will end. Hugs will return. Something closer to normal will emerge. And let's bring it up another level. with the return of Jesus and how amazing that is. We're not going to have to be listening to all these governments saying all these, press conferences and this, that, and the other thing. Why? Because Jesus himself will govern directly. That's a press conference I want to see. We won't need to have hospitals. Why? Because Jesus himself will wipe every tear from their eyes. Revelation 21. Difficulty is a comma, not a period, in the scope of eternity. Difficulty is a comma, not a period, in the scope of eternity, in the scope of hope. When you have something good to look forward to, it softens the blow of what you're currently going through, okay? That's why perseverance is hitched to that hope. Number 3, stand firm. Or as it says in other translations, strengthen your hearts. But how? And this was answered last week. Draw near to God, James 4:6. Draw near to God. James 4:8, draw near to God or draw close to God, and he will draw near to you. It's a promise. And so if you are doing that, if you are consciously drawing closer to God, he will draw closer to you. And that is how you establish yourself and stand firm. If you are not drawing near to God, if you are not taking his word seriously, if you're casual about prayer or about worship or seeking to serve Jesus in the Lord's name, all these, if you're casual about all and you're flippant all on that, you're not going to be able to stand firm. Friends, it's like a cultural, social, psychological tornado out there. This is the time to stand firm. I was online for something this week, and one of those ads popped up for those winter cleats, that you put on your boots, and they help you walk across ice or go up some rocky path. They help you to stand firm. Draw near to God, he will draw near to you. That's those winter cleats helping you to establish your hearts in the winds that are blowing. Without them, you're just like some cat who runs out on an ice rink and swirling around in a tornado, right? Number 4, don't grumble against one another. Don't grumble. This is so down to earth, this series. James, he's so practical. Grumbling has a way of eroding the very relationships that sustain us. Now, for some reason, when we're going through something difficult, we can be at our worst with the people who love us the most. Makes no sense. We can be at our worst with the people who love us the most. Why is that? Maybe we're comfortable, we let our guard down, we're honest, and so all of a sudden we start to take our crummy days out on the people around us, but it's so counterintuitive. Why would we undermine our own gold mine of support? God has given us people in our lives to support us, to strengthen us in the church, in our friends, our family. Why would we undermine our own gold mine of support? But that's what we often do. So instead, we use words that encourage and build each other up. Think of a moment in your life when someone has said something to you, a sustaining word that's been so good when you've just needed to hear it. That's the potential and power of your words towards someone else. Because guess what? If you're feeling like you need that stuff right now, everyone else needs that stuff right now. Just this past week, I was having a couple of crummy days for reasons we don't need to get into. But anyway, someone sent me a note of encouragement. And you know what? It brought tears to my eyes. Like, I'll be honest. And I was just like, wow, that was just gas in the tank to get me through a day that I'm not sure I was going to get through. Right? Okay. 5th, look to the example of others who have persevered. This is part of our perseverance being hitched to hope. It's part of the strategy. James says, look to the prophets. He holds up Job as an example, and we talked about that. And so you can think of people in your life. Who are other examples of people, faithful people, who have persevered? And because we know them, they're flesh and blood people. It's like they inspire us when we look at those people. Sometimes these are famous people. Sometimes it's people we know. Here's an example of famous people. Joni Eareckson Tada, very famous woman, got into an accident, became a quadriplegic when she was young. I think she was in her 20s. But has faithful persevered. She's inspired millions of people. There's another example I want to share with you, less well known. Xi Yonghair, a Christian who lived in communist China, and he was working to make house churches legal. Of course, the government threw him in jail. He was in there for 24 months in an 8x8 cell, squalor. And he's there, and sometimes he shared the cell with other people who were on their last stop before execution. So he's there. There's only like one drainage pipe coming into the thing. It was horrific. But he's there, and how did he persevere? Well, he says, because he got out after 24 months, he said he prayed, he meditated on God and his goodness. And he had this one comfort, which was a bar of soap And he had this idea for a book about the greatness and good of God. So he sketched out an outline for a book about God on the wall in his cell with this bar of soap. He committed it to memory, and when he got out, he copied it back out again, translated it into a 50,000-word book called God the Creator. It's like an inspiring example of people who have persevered, and sometimes when we're aware of what they've been through, it helps us go through what we're dealing with. And so think of yourself on your own level, on your own personal level. Maybe it's not someone famous. Maybe it's someone you know. It's a youth, a leader, a Sunday school teacher from your past. Maybe it's a friend of the family, someone in your church family. Think of someone who's been faithful and has persevered. As you think about their example, it will help you. James says, look to the people who have persevered. Like, they inspire us. They help us get through it. Someone for me, I've mentioned him before, Winston Newman. He's my prayer partner. He's preached here before. He's in his 70s. He's married. He's had kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, all the stuff with family over the years, a long ministry, gospel-centered ministry, with all the joys, but also all the sufferings of ordained ministry, his own health issues, all this stuff through the years. This guy remains fixed on God. Dude does not stop going. That dude does not stop going, and it's inspiring. So who are those people in your own lives? All right, back one final time to our key question. Do you want to persevere with the load that you're carrying? Let's zero in on James' words one last time. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. Be patient and stand firm because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another. As an example of the patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Sorry, next slide. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Final thought, I want to paint for you a contrast. Viktor Frankl wrote a memoir about his experience in a World War II concentration camp, and he talks about the power of hope or not having hope in someone's life. And he was a doctor, and so people would come to him and sometimes share things with him. And this one guy came to him and said, I had this dream. I want to tell you about it. And in this dream, I heard this voice, and this voice said, ask me anything, and I will tell you what the answer is. And so this guy said, when will the war end for me? And the voice said, March 30th. And so this guy woke up, and he's like, wow, I'm convinced that this is right. And so he had this fresh energy and enthusiasm, right? But the closer they got to March 30th, the more he started to deflate because it was clear that the war wasn't really going to end. And so March 29th, he started to get listless, sick. March 30th, the day that the war was supposed to end, he lost consciousness. The next day, he died. His hope was misplaced, and it totally changed his reality. In contrast, Christian psychiatrist M. Scott Peck tells about how when patients are going through something, surgery or something else, and they have something hopeful, something to look forward to, they're more likely to succeed. They're more likely to do it. It's not just one isolated case. This happens, he talks about it happens all the time. A very simple example that makes the point, but I love it because we can relate to it. There's this one guy he talks about who loved golf. This is one of the guys, 3-4 times a week golf, big part of his life, healthy, all that stuff. Anyway, he needed the surgery. He wasn't able to golf anymore. It was really hurting him. But he was so looking forward to this surgery, and he was so convinced that things were going to go well and that he'd be able to golf again, is that before his surgery, he booked a tee time a couple weeks out. That's how confident he was. Like, no, this is going to go well. I'm going to get on that course again. And he did. Perseverance is hitched to hope. It's a tough time, and many of us, let's be honest, are pulling trailers of stone. They're heavy. We want to persevere. We can do that by hitching up to the hope of the gospel. Jesus himself is our ultimate example of perseverance. Get this. Criticized, tearful, flogged, unjustly condemned, tortured, spat upon, mocked, crucified, speared, abandoned, buried. Talk about a tough time. but on the third day, resurrected, victorious, loving and persevering not only for himself, but for anyone who puts their trust in him. Thanks be to our glorious God, who is able to do so much more than any of us can ever ask or imagine. Glory to him as we wait for his glorious and triumphant return, where everything will finally and fully be made right. And in the meantime, as James tells us, first, be patient. Second, be patient because suffering won't last. Christ will return. Third, stand firm. Fourth, don't grumble against one another. Why would you do that to your own team and support group? Build each other up. Fifth, look to the example of others who have persevered. Perseverance is hitched. Perseverance is hitched to hope. Amen.
Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. Be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, as an example of patience in the face of suffering. Take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy.